Jai Jhulelal and Satnam Sakhi to all our many viewers who are joining us from across various time zones. Thank you for spending this evening with us. You know, many of us are guilty, and I especially, of Googling every ache, pain, symptom, and we self-diagnose ourselves all the time. But we also know that not everything on the World Wide Web is the gospel truth. And for this reason, and a few more as you all will soon discover, SANSKRITI SANSKAARS have curated this very special show about body's chemical messengers, the hormones. So without further ado, let the doctor in the house teach and educate us on how hormones are essential for life and your health. Dr. Ajay Bhatnagar. He has a PhD in organic chemistry and a postdoctoral research in physiology. He spent 14 years as a professor in the College of Virginia, doing gynecology, biochemistry, and obstetrics. That was a bit of a tongue twister for me. As a professor in the US, he was concerned with research into the ways to treat infertility, manage high-risk pregnancies, and finally, to the mechanisms which were involved in the development of hormone-dependent breast cancer. Very specific. He also, after he was finished his tenure as a professor, he went on to Ciba-Geigy Novartis. And there, Dr. Bhatnagar was involved in the research of hormone-dependent breast cancer in menopausal women. His main research interests are steroid endocrinology and the development of endocrine monitoring techniques with applications to humans. Dr. Bhatnagar has been a member of several professional societies. He is a member of a number of editorial boards of scientific periodicals. He has authored and co-authored over 80 publications in peer-reviewed journals, and also been a featured speaker at many international meetings and symposiums. Dr. Bhatnagar, we are truly honored to have you take time out and spend this evening with us. Thank you so much. And joining him on the Q&A session are Bhavika and Kritika, who make up the core team at SANSKRITI SANSKAARS with Dadu Zen, who's the founder of this wonderful platform. Ever ready and willing to pitch in and do the work it takes in bringing this program together to fruition. Thank you for the selfless work and dedication both of you put out. I truly hope that this show will be an eye-opener, a learning experience for not just the ladies in the house, but for all the men out there who are going to be equipped better to be the supportive other halves that they already are. So without further ado, let's start the show. Thank you. And of course, we have Dadu Zen here. Thank you, Dadu Zen, for joining us. He will share his Mann Ki Baat with us. Thank you. Jai Jhulelal ji.
Jai Shri Ram. Can you bring all the guest speakers on the floor? Hari Om, everyone.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Welcome all of you. Before we start the Q&A session, I would like to share some thoughts with all of you. This is of an extremely crucial word that concerns each one of us. Can you guess what it could be? Bhavika, can you guess the word that I'm going to talk on? Just briefly. The word is happiness. Okay. Now, from a philosophical point of view, there are 4 categories of happiness. But to discuss all of them at one time is a long story. So what we will do, let us define happiness in simple terms. So the definition goes like this from Dadu Zen. It is simply an elation of the psyche and or mood into an elevation of satisfaction and cheerfulness. So this is my definition. It could be added on. Most welcome if anybody has anything to, contribute to this definition. But this, in its nature, is very erratic, short-lived, transient, and culminates in a peak. And then, in an anticlimax, the mood that has been elevated descends to the valley of your basic nature. Now, your basic nature could be restful or restless, peaceful or passionate. So this is a very important aspect of happiness, that it doesn't stay at its peaks very long. It peaks out. Okay? So the yogis have said, the sages have said, they are guiding us that instead of running after happiness, aspire for three things. One, health. Health should be mental and physical. Two, humor. Humor should be inculcated in your life, because life without humor is like living with a tumor. And humor should be unselfish and non hurting. That should be very important. And the last is harmony. You must be in harmony with yourself and your psychic counterparts, and you should be in harmony with the world. Then only what you will achieve is what you call a good pH value. Now, what is pH value? Not potential of hydrogen, but potential for peace to a longer duration of the hype of happiness. You have to continue the duration that makes you more happy and more happy moments in your life. Now, lastly, the saints have advised us two important things which I'd like to share with all of you, including our loving viewers, that the most important thing is, don't run after happiness. Do not run after happiness, but enjoy thoroughly without any guilt or denial, but with a deep gratitude and awareness. So the point here is not to run after the pleasures of the happiness derived from pleasures of sense gratification, but you don't have to run. But if it comes your way, do not deny them. Enjoy it thoroughly. That is the key point here. And second too is, don't try to make people happy. You see what happens? In trying to make people happy, you become happy yourself. Because happiness, if you want to give anybody happiness, you have to see that they are receptive. If they are not receptive, they can never be happy, no matter what you try. For example, your husband or your boyfriend or whatever is sitting watching a football game, and he's busy, engaged trying to see, Messi giving the final penalty kick, and suddenly you decide to become romantic or, very friendly. What are you going to? What do you expect? You know what to expect, right? So don't try to make people happy at the wrong time when they are not receptive. So with these two, piece of advice, I will now like to welcome our guest speaker, honorary guest, with our traditional doha. Ajay Saab, namaskaram. This Kabir Sahib, I always quote doha from Kabir Speaks. Kabir, fortunately, I just want to show off a little bit. I've translated 300 dohas of Sahib Kabir in English. So I'm going to give you one today. It says, Swas swas par naam lai, swas swas par naam lai, birta swas mat khoye, birta सांस मत खोए, ना जाने उस श्वास का आवन होए न होए. So what he's trying to say, Kabir Sahib, chant his name with every breath. let not precious breath go in waste. Who knows if the exhaled breath will return ever in haste? So this is the moral is very clear that if you want to remember the Lord, then the only way is that you chant His name with every breath, which is very precious to all of us. Now, with that, I will let Bhavika conduct the first question here. And Ajay ji, once again, welcome. Please entertain our viewers and the curiosity of our panel speakers. Bhavika, you're on. Ajay ji, you're on.
Jai Shri Krishna, Om Shanti, Jai Jhulelal. Dadu, first of all, it's such a pleasure to be with you today after so many episodes. We have missed you. You are the light of the entire show and may it continue for years to come, Dadu. Thank you so, so much.
Hari Om, Hari Om.
Warm welcome to the guest of honor, of course, and to our panel speaker. So, Dr. Ajay, I'd like to ask you the first question. Do we age because hormones decline, or hormones decline, so therefore we age?
Thank you very much, first of all, to Dayalji for inviting me to be here today to try and expound a little bit on an area that I've spent all my life working on, the area of hormones and endocrinology. And the questions of the panel speakers, I've looked at your programs before, and you make very difficult questions, which makes it even more challenging to try and come up with answers that sound at least a little bit logical. So to the first question that you asked, Bhavika, aging is a process that we are only now starting to understand. And it would be very easy if I tell you why it has taken us so long. If you know that until about 50 years ago, life expectancy was between 10 and 15 years lower than it is now. So the aging process had to be studied in somebody, say, between the age of 50 and 65. And nobody really wanted to call anybody who was 50 years old aged or aging in that manner. And so much of the work that has been done over the last maybe 10 years, 10, 15 years. And we are slowly getting there. But there is unfortunately no direct answer to your question, because how we study all of this is by seeing in people of different ages, if we can see changes in different parameters that we have the ability to look at carefully and maybe measure. And it has been found that there is a time-related, because aging is a time-related chronology. There is a time-related relationship between hormones and how much of them we find as people age. Now, you won't be surprised to know that the only people really worried about aging are men. And men have always wondered what actually happens to them as they age, because what they experienced was the unpleasant part of aging. Aging had an effect on their virility. Aging had an effect on their fertility. And so because men as endocrine animals, if I may call them that, are actually very simple animals compared to women who are very complex animals as far as their endocrinology goes. And by doing the appropriate studies, it was found that as men age, a few things happen that could be documented well. One could show that testosterone levels drop after the age of about 50, and they continue to drop as one becomes older and goes to the limits of age of life expectancy, which today in many countries is around about 80 years. The second thing is that of all the things that happen that are not good, the worst is that they seem to have an effect, aging seems to have an effect on the prostate gland. And the prostate gland is the most common tumor of aging males. It used to be at one time lung cancer, not anymore. It's prostate cancer now. And so one is slowly trying to find out what is it that comes from this aging process of reduced testosterone levels that has an effect on our health. So it is not possible to say that aging causes a reduction in testosterone or that reduced testosterone has an effect on aging. But it is more a relationship. Aging is related to lower testosterone levels. Aging is related to a higher incidence of prostate cancer. And these are the sorts of things that one can do today. And I'm sure in 50 years, when my young students are then getting to my age, we will know a lot more about what the aging process does to us and how it is related to the hormones that we make.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So actually, Dr. Ajay, most of my groups and conversations are right now all about menopause and perimenopause and all of that. So my second question to you is, what exactly are the different phases of menopause?
Well, menopause is something I've studied for many years. I was involved with the production, the discovery, and well, not so much the discovery, in the production of a treatment modality for menopause. And I'll come to that in just a minute. Menopause starts in women, and in men, it's referred to as andropause, which is how one defines this reduction in testosterone levels. Now, menopause starts in women at different ages. It can start as early as 30, 35 years old, what is called premature menopause. And then it goes through a period where the characteristic features of menopause slowly develop. And this period is called the perimenopause. And perimenopause then leads into full-blown menopause. So speaking practically, there are two stages that one knows of and that one can define. One is perimenopause, and the other then full-blown menopause.
Okay, wonderful. So perimenopause symptoms and from menopause symptoms, they basically vary, right? Yeah. And
Well,
so are there any natural remedies or supplements that one can offset them?
well, then I think the question one needs to answer is, why does menopause occur?
Why?
And the reason why menopause and perimenopause occurs, because in the female, in the reproductively mature female, there is a very complex interplay in the reproductive endocrine system of a female. It involves the brain, it involves the ovaries, and it involves the tissues that the hormones that come from the ovaries go in effect. So when one looks at practically what a mature woman is, a mature premenopausal woman, she is a person who menstruates every month. And the menstruation comes from a very complex interplay between hormones from the brain, from the pituitary, hormones from the ovary, either the estrogens or the progesterone-like compounds. And these changes are there for one reason and one reason only. The reason is for the procreation and for the continuation of humankind. The woman's ovaries has the female part of the egg system, as I call it. The eggs, the ova that they have in their ovaries, have to be released. Before they're released, when you look at the ovary stores several 100,000 to 1,000,000 eggs, but they are immature eggs. So the first thing the pituitary has to do is to bring these eggs to maturity. They bring them to maturity in a cycle of 28 days, where on the 14th day, the egg is at its maturest, it is released, and it is ready to be fertilized by the human sperm. Now, what is this process for? This process is to cause pregnancy to ensue. And to cause pregnancy to ensue, the fertilized egg has to find a place where it can grow. And the place where it can grow is the uterus. And in the uterus, in the first 14 days, the eggs have made estrogen. So this causes the uterus to grow. And the next 14 days, the ovary makes progesterone, which causes the uterus to be filled with nutrients that the newly fertilized egg can live on and multiply and grow till it becomes a fetus and then into a newborn child. So what happens in menopause is that this machinery is interrupted. It's interrupted one step after another. And to again understand that, one needs to know what happens in a cycle where there is no pregnancy, where there's no egg that's fertilized. What happens to the uterus? Well, the uterus has to regenerate itself, and it bleeds and menstruation occurs. So menopause, by the name itself, says a stopping of uterine bleeding or of bleeding in the female. And if you look at some radio going bad, a radio, when it's working properly, has a beautiful signal. You can hear lovely music. And as it starts to go back, it gets rough. And you can hear some sounds, but you can't hear others. You can recognize the sounds, but they don't sound very good. Well, exactly the same thing happens in the woman. The bleeding from the uterus becomes spotty. You don't bleed as much. Sometimes you don't bleed at all. And that is the perimenopause. In the perimenopause, it is still possible to get pregnant. In the menopause is the culmination of the menopausal process. It is the end where no more pregnancy can happen. And the egg, the ovary, and the uterine system does not function anymore. So what happens now when the eggs are not functioning? There's no estrogen. And estrogen is the hormone that takes care of many of the female functions, not just before menopause, but also after menopause. But after menopause, there's no estrogen. So the treatment modality for menopause has been to give women estrogen. Now, that is the allopathic or the school medicine treatment of menopause. However, we know that there are many plants that make estrogen-like compounds. So there are many women who say, I don't want to take a hormone. I'd rather take a plant tablet or extract or whatever it is. And there's some of the plants that are very well known. There's soya bean, for example. Soya bean contains very potent estrogen-like compounds. And so when you take somebody whose diet is very high in soybean will have aberrations of the endocrine system that makes estrogen. Unfortunately, we haven't done enough research to be able to tell whether there are other plants that can also supply estrogen-like compounds. And Ayurveda, though it is very prolific in what it describes, hasn't done very much in this area, because in the old days, at least the what I read about this, in the old days, a woman's duty was to have children. And having children was the primary duty. And when they could not have children anymore, when they were going into menopause, people were not interested in them anymore. The men were not interested in them, say 100, 200 years ago. And so there was no question about making a woman again once she goes into menopause. So the treatment of menopause is a fairly young function, and the drug modality that I was able to work on and to discover only came on the market in the 1980s. It was only researched in the 1970s. That was just about 50 years ago now, if you look at it that way. And so we do not have very much that we can offer from plant materials, which I am sure make estrogen-like compounds.
Fantastic.
I see.
All a woman will love what you're trying to say. I mean, how you're explaining. Bhavika, are you convinced?
Actually, the thing is, I wanted to ask. So, Dr. Ajay was talking about soya milk. I mean, soya bean, right? So, you think soya milk also gives that kind of estrogen production in the body? Because right now, so many women are my age, and most of us, are having lots of hormone, changes, like I said earlier. So, do you think soya milk would help, Dr. Ajay?
Soya bean contains compounds that function like estrogen. And so people who are, for example, people who eat a soya diet as a regular part of their diet, younger women have problems menstruating because I mentioned to you, the process is extremely complex, and added estrogen causes an aberration in this process, so they don't go through the process very well. So soya bean is for women who are having perimenopausal symptoms and menopausal symptoms. Yes, it doesn't help in all, but it certainly does help in some.
Wonderful. Thank you. So my fourth question is, can you please help us understand what HRT, because so many of us have so many apprehensions for HRT, because some people say, it's a great therapy, it helps in balancing a lot of things in you, but then some of our old people, they say that it should be a natural process, because this will hinder with your a lot of parts in your body which can go wrong. So I want you to enlighten us more on this HRT, please.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question, because that is a question that has been on my mind for at least the last 40 years. Now, the hormonal treatment of menopause, the earliest hormonal treatment of menopause came from a drug called Premarin. And Premarin is the estrogen you find in horses when they're pregnant. So the horse's urine was extracted for these compounds. They were made pure. They were made into a tablet. And that was the tablet Premarin, which was given to women in the 50s and 60s. It's a very old drug. However, Premarin is a compound that comes from horses, and so is foreign to the human female. And anytime you give a drug that is foreign to a human female, there are many things you have to deal with. Side effects, because you don't know exactly how it's going to work. You know how it works in horses, in female horses, but certainly not in female in women. But that was the very first drug that was available to us. And when I started working in this area, it was quite obvious to me that HRT, which means hormone replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy is replacing what? It is replacing that hormone that I mentioned earlier that goes down with age, and that is estradiol. That is the most potent estrogen in women. And so why couldn't we give women estradiol? Well, there's a problem to start off with right away. When we wanted to give estradiol by mouth, orally, and when you give estradiol orally, the body breaks it down within 90 minutes. So it's not very helpful. You'd have to give a lot of estradiol to a woman for there to be enough to substitute or to replace the estradiol she's not making. And so the company that I worked for, Sibagaigi, at the same time was working on a transdermal delivery of estradiol, because it is the natural hormone. It is the hormone that not just you and Kritika make, but I and Dayalji make as well. It is a natural human hormone. And what better replacement for a natural human hormone is the natural human hormone itself. And so we had to find a way to get estradiol into the circulation. And we did it using what's called a transdermal plaster. It was a transdermal piece of plaster which was impregnated in a certain way with estradiol. That was the technical part of it. And it released estradiol through the skin into the bloodstream, and it gave extremely good results. So if anybody would like to take a therapeutic agent, the best agent for a female would be to take the natural hormone, which is present in the transdermal delivery of compounds like estradiol.
Fantastic.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
Bhavika,
Yeah,
you're finished with your questions? You
finished. Thank you.
questioned very well. Before we give the platform to Kritika, I have one question for Dr. G. Dr. G, you mentioned about this estradiol, right? The hormone. Now, which endocrine glands is responsible for this?
Okay. Estradiol is made primarily by the ovaries in a mature female. So that is when a young girl becomes a woman, her ovaries begin to make estradiol. Before that, it's a slow process where she makes a little bit, but not enough, a little bit more, and then comes the day when she has her first period, which is the day where the ovary is functioning like it should in a young woman, where it makes estradiol and it makes progesterone and causes the lining of the uterus to remove itself because there was no pregnancy that took place, and you have your first period. So that is the hormone that is made in the ovary and made primarily in the ovary.
So the pituitary and pineal or thyroid have nothing to do with this production?
Yes, they do. I had said when I first started that all these procedures are complex procedures.
So everything is involved.
Yes, ovaries cannot make estradiol without being stimulated from the pituitary with a hormone, actually two hormones, but two hormones called luteinizing hormone, LH, and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. If those hormones are not there, and there is a disease where the pituitary does not make those hormones, and young girls don't mature into young women.
Interesting. Okay, I'll let Kritika please ask your
Yeah.
interesting 4
Thank you.
questions. I'll take over. Go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bhavik.
Thank you so much, Dayal uncle, for giving me this opportunity today to be a part of this great show. And
Welcome.
I was just listening and gathering so much new information which I was not aware of. So you were telling about hormone replacement therapy, Dr. J. So are there any high risk categories that you wouldn't recommend it to, like to those people who should not go in for the hormone replacement therapy? So please enlighten us with the same.
Okay. To do that, I'll have to bring in a little bit of information which I haven't given you at the moment. In about 3/4 of women, the breast cancer that they develop grows in response to estradiol. And so there was a hypothesis that said, if we are giving women estradiol, are we not increasing the risk of breast cancer? And a lot of studies were done, very big studies. There was a study called the Million Woman Study. There was the Framingham study that was done in the US. And all of these studies showed a relationship between estradiol treatment and the occurrence of breast cancer. But the problem was it was not possible for us to say, is the estradiol causing the initiation of cancer? Or is it promoting cancer that we otherwise can't see? Promoting cancer to grow, because we know that estradiol causes growth of breast cancer. So what comes now in terms of risk? Risk, it is obvious that since we do not know on which day an egg is starting to grow, we can't say who should get estradiol and who should not get estradiol. So like in anything that has to do with treatment, you have to balance out the positive with the negative. And here comes the very difficult question that needs to be asked. Estrogen is also a hormone that supports the heart. And we know that in young menopausal women, the incidence of heart attack is higher than in women who are cycling. All right? We also know that in menopausal women, the incidence of breast cancer tends to be higher than in women who are cycling. So now this 1 million woman study was able to show that the risk of heart attacks not having any estrogen was 2 to 3 times higher than having breast cancer. And so the question now comes for every individual woman, is your risk of heart attack in your family, do you have a history of heart disease? And is that heart disease significant? Do you have relatives who've died of a heart attack? Or do you have an incidence of breast cancer? And then depending upon what the answer to that question is, a good doctor will say, I would recommend for women who have family histories of heart disease not to take estradiol. And in women who have high incidences of breast cancer, for example, carry the BRCA1 and 2 genes, not to take hormone replacement therapy. But then I also have to tell you, Kritika, that these women who are at risk constitute in the end less than 1% of all women who need hormone replacement therapy. So it is a decision you make, but it is a decision that should be made with as much information as we have, and we are trying to generate as much of the information as we can.
Right. So, of course, the ones who have such kind of history, they are more prone to breast cancer, so they should avoid this.
Yes.
From your answer, I could get this. So, how does one combat the testosterone decline, and what are its symptoms, and what could be the probable causes of this decline? If you could enlighten us on this as well.
I'll answer your last part of your question first. We don't know what causes the decline in testosterone. We know that it happens, but we don't know what causes it. All right?
Okay.
And for men, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, applies just as it does to women. The only difference is the hormone that we are replacing here is testosterone.
Testosterone, yeah. Okay.
And there are several drugs on the market which either transdermally through the skin, just like the estradiol, supply testosterone, or there are injections of synthetic testosterone that one can use, and there are pills of synthetic testosterone that one can have. And the problem always lies in that when you give the natural hormone is no different to what the men make themselves. The synthetic hormones are different. So the body looks at them as a foreign compound or a foreign chemical in the circulation, and they react differently, which is why we've spent so much time trying to find ways of delivering the natural hormones. And we can only do that in men and women through this transdermal system at the present time.
Very good. Fantastic. Go ahead, Kritika, for your next question.
Yeah. So, so through this, I understand that we all need to keep a focus. We need to study what is going inside out, and what is the family history, if we talk about. Only then we can go ahead with such kind of a therapy. And one important part also is that there is no cause as such which is known to the mankind as of now. However advanced we have been, but there are certain kind of questions which are still unanswered, and we are still trying to find the answers to such questions. So I would also feel that look at we humans, that we all have egos, different kinds of egos, that I'm so, I know so much. But at the end of the day, if we look at the biggest doctor or the biggest engineer, biggest architect, it's the God, like the Almighty, who has made all of us. And with such kind of small incidents, I feel grateful that we all are blessed enough to feel the presence of God and to be grateful. Yeah. And so are we grateful for this great question answer session also with you. And through this, you are trying to enlighten all of us and all the viewers, of course, today who are present with us. So my next question to you is, breast cancer occurs in both men and women. So are they both hormone related? Like we just discussed about it, that whichever cell, whichever egg gets developed, but we don't know which part will lead to the occurrence of breast cancer. So are they both hormone related, or how it is? If you could just explain to us.
Although I am a very strong proponent, and I say a hooray every time when someone talks about the differences between men and women, because without these differences, life would be absolutely boring.
True.
However, with regard to breast cancer, it is exactly the same.
Okay.
The incidence of breast cancer in males is about 1/10 that in females.
Okay.
All right? In females, 75% of their breast cancers tend to be hormone dependent, and 25% are not hormone dependent. So by far the vast majority is hormone dependent. In males, over 90% of the breast cancers are hormone dependent. So they are very much like the menopausal women.
Yeah.
The cause, we don't know. Or in either case, we are, as you mentioned quite rightly, we are working on it. But the same uh, therapy that work in women also work in men, with a little difference, is that we men make things life difficult for our scientists. Because although we can treat the women who are menopausal very well, because we know that their functioning systems are not functioning anymore. So we can't interfere with anything. All that we are interfering with is with their not causing their breast cancers to grow. With men, when you use the same sorts of drugs, you increase the amount of testosterone that you make. And so you have to know that and you have to care for that. And so most researchers were not very keen to do studies in men. But now those studies are being done. And they show that men respond to the therapies that we have for women just as well as women do. So we know that the tumor is the same. We know that his responses are the same. And now we also know that the same therapies work in both men and women.
Yeah.
Dr. Ji, I have one question.
Certainly.
The question has come from the floor. The question is, why would anybody take HRT if there is a risk of breast cancer?
Well, I can answer that question in two ways. As I said to you, the risk of dying, and this is not just incidence, risk of dying with a heart attack is twice as high as the risk of breast cancer. That's number one. So you have to make a decision. Do I have a risk of dying by heart attack if I don't take HRT? Or do I have a risk of getting breast cancer if I take HRT? That is the first question you have to answer. The second question is defined by the following. Today, we have very effective therapies for breast cancer if it is discovered early. And so in those very few women, the incidence is very low. The incidence of getting breast cancer if you take hormone replacement therapy is so low, and those women who unfortunately do get it have much better therapeutic options today that are getting better all the time. So that is one thing. The other thing that we haven't talked about here at all is what are the positive effects of hormone replacement therapy?
Yeah.
And here again, it depends on the individual herself as to whether she considers these priority issues in her life or not. But I can tell you some of them. One of the very important issues is that it contributes to an improvement of her sexual activity, and that always leads to an improvement in happiness. The second one is lack of estradiol causes bones to get brittle. Very slowly, but they do get brittle, leading to something called osteoporosis. If you look at what the major cause of morbidity is in women above the age of 70, you will find that it is fractures of the wrist and of the hip, and that these fractures recur again and again and are not very easily treatable. And so if you want to prevent these fractures, you give hormone replacement therapy to slow down the incidence of osteoporosis and make the bones stronger to physical damage, like falling on your wrist. And anytime anybody falls, your first reaction is to use your hand to prevent your fall, and that breaks the wrist. So it is a very common fracture of the menopausal woman. So that there are benefits, and most certainly there are disadvantages, and one has to measure them one against the other and decide what is important for my life.
They have special doctors who can guide them.
Yes,
They have special.
there are, but I think that one has to always ask. I tell my wife this all the time, and she has learned very well. When you go to your doctor and he or she says something, ask them a follow-up question. Don't be afraid to ask your doctors, your medical doctors, questions. That's what they are there for. But if a medical doctor is not interested in answering your question, find another doctor.
Yeah.
Good.
Right, right. Very rightly
That's
said.
good advice.
Yeah, and
Okay.
nowadays there is a lot of awareness among women also about different types of issues, like we were discussing about menopause, etc., and also about breast cancer, the symptoms. If any of the symptom appears, then women are very careful about it, and they rightly go and get the checkups, etc., done. So that is why early detection of breast cancer is also possible just because of this only. So my next question to you is that is Ayurveda an efficient natural therapy to combat hormonal imbalances? Because nowadays, if we look at women, every other woman is suffering from hormonal imbalances, and this is the most common disease. There are PCODs. Such kind of diseases have become very much common in today's time, and many of the doctors they say that it is a lifestyle disease. Hormonal imbalance is a lifestyle disease, and because of intake of such kinds of foods, this also happens, and the lifestyle has changed nowadays. So is it the reason, or the reason is not yet known, or how one should combat this through any of the natural therapy or some Ayurvedic therapy? If you could explain to us, please.
Well, if you remember when I started talking at the beginning of this program, I mentioned that women are enormously more complex human beings than men. And so it becomes a real challenge. I mean, as as Anita introduced me, I spent 14 years as a professor in obstetrics and gynecology and dealt a lot with these sorts of situations because my colleagues would come to me and say, we have this problem, and what do we do about it? All right.
Right.
So what I can tell you is that hormonal imbalances are part of being an adult woman. More hormonal balances are part of being an active adult woman. And even more hormonal imbalances are people who don't listen to Dayalji when he talks to you about happiness and says the mental state of mind is extremely important in happiness. And it is the same state of mind which helps not just men, or not just women, but also men in keeping their physiological body systems functioning properly. So when one has these hormonal imbalances, either you say to yourself, well, I need to do something to myself rather than go and take any Ayurveda or Ayurvedic medicine to treat myself, because in the end, I am my best doctor. I can treat myself the best way because I know myself best. All right. Having said all of that, I will also end by saying I am a very big proponent of Ayurveda. If one does not find or feels I cannot take allopathic medicine, there is nothing wrong at all in taking Ayurvedic medicine because there is a benefit, but there's also a disadvantage. But the benefit is Ayurveda dealt with treatments that mostly were very well tolerated and were not toxic. Right? However, they also didn't work as well. And so
Right.
if Ayurveda works for you, there's nothing as good as that. Anything
Yeah.
that works for you, there is nothing better. And if it's Ayurveda, then that's what I would do.
Right. I
Fantastic.
have met several women who did follow the Ayurveda, and they believe that Ayurveda is a way of life, basically, in which you have to change your lifestyle, your food habits, your sleeping time, etc., which has to suit with the nature. So it actually synchronizes with the nature more, and you have to understand your prakriti, whether it is pitta, kapha, what kind of prakriti you have, basically. So that is how it works. So it is very synchronizing with the nature, and that is how people get cured through Ayurveda. I have met several people who got benefited, so I'm sure using Ayurvedic therapies would also help in hormonal imbalance for the women. Over to you, Dayal uncle.
थैंक यू जी, थैंक यू। डॉक्टर अजय जी, आप तो हमको मर्दों को डरा दिए आज। I never knew that men get breast cancer. This is the first time I heard this. How does this happen? I mean, really, what are the symptoms of that?
Your
I'm sure all the
sound
men
got
must
cut
be
off.
quite afraid of listening to your talk now.
Your sound got cut off, and I didn't hear the middle part. Could you just repeat it quickly?
I said, what are the symptoms of men getting breast cancer? What is
Exactly
there
the
any
same as
difference?
women.
Same
How
equivalent.
do women detect breast cancer? Some of them detect it by doing manual breast exam, and that is far more difficult because, as we know, men's breasts are much smaller than those of women. So finding a lump is a lot easier in men than it is in women, and the glandular tissue, the tissue which simulates the woman's breast, is much smaller. So the tissue that's available is smaller, and so the tumor, when it grows, is much easier to detect than it is with women. With women, we do mammography. One doesn't really have to do that with men because the tumors are very easy to detect.
I see. You mentioned something about andropause.
Yes.
That's a male equivalent of menopause. What is this about? All about?
Well, all I can tell you is men felt left out when women talked about menopause all the time. And what they decided was, why don't we give it a name? We are reducing testosterone, just like women are reducing estrogen. So menopause means the stopping of menstruation. Men don't have menstruation. We don't have any procedure that's like menstruation. So what procedure do we have? We don't have any procedure. So let's give it a fancy name. Andro, meaning relating to man, and pause, relating to pause. So andropause became the male equivalent of menopause.
Yeah,
Makes
but
sense?
what are the symptoms for men? What happens to them if they suffer from andropause? I mean,
Well,
whatever that is.
we talked about that for replacement with testosterone. You can do it either transdermally, you can do it by pills. I mean, that is what then causes erectile dysfunction to be reduced a little bit. One causes people to be able to have a longer duration of sexual activity. These are the sorts of things which bring you back to a younger age with by the addition of hormone from the outside. But it
I
is the
see.
same as the natural hormone.
We will discuss this matter on a private level because now we have only 5 minutes left, and I got two questions,
Okay.
quick questions in these 5 minutes. One is, can you talk something about infertility in men and women, and how do you resolve that problem from your point
Well,
of view?
the way you talk about infertility in men and women is to talk about fertility first. To be fertile, men have to have adequate sperm. To be fertile, women have to produce one egg every month. So infertility is the inability of the endocrine system in that particular female not to be able to produce one egg a month. And in males, it is to produce not just less sperm, but another characteristic of sperm is their motility, is how fast they move. And in men, infertility is a consequence of either not enough sperm or sperm with not enough motility. All these processes are dependent on the same hormones in men and women: testosterone in men and estrogen in women. And that is the way you actually treat them.
Nothing to do with impotency, is it?
Well, impotency is just a description of the inability to do the whole thing. That is, sexual intercourse with a woman doesn't result in a pregnancy. So one talks about men being impotent.
Okay, great. So now the last question is that, according to mystical research of Rosicrucians and many other mystic schools, the pineal center is a psychic counterpart of the pineal gland and the pituitary gland. And according to them, that it is responsible for 70% of psychic vision. For example, people with highly developed this center, pineal center, can even see the soul of the deceased. And according to yogis, they have mentioned this as the seat of soul consciousness. Some say the eye of God, and some say the third eye. So this is a center which we are taught that from which the divine intelligence appears in most of us in this through us. So the pineal gland, according to yogis and sages, is one of the most important endocrine glands in our being, though it's such a small, teeny weeny, half centimeter or whatever. So, and also we have heard that any deficiency in pineal gland results in insomnia and at the same time tendency to sleep too much. Do you have any study on this or any opinion on this? Whatever I've
Well,
said.
as a scientist, I am fascinated by the pineal gland because it is a challenge that we endocrinologists have had for many years, and we actually still have. What hampers us in our work is the fact that the pineal gland makes a hormone called melatonin. And melatonin has what's called a half-life in the blood of about 3 to 4 minutes, which means it's very difficult to measure melatonin in the blood. So the only way you can study the pineal gland is by saying, I'm going to find a way to give melatonin to humans. But the half-life is still 3 to 4 minutes. So you have to either give large quantities, and it's not easy to make the compound. And even if you give it, it disappears in the blood very quickly. But what one does know is that melatonin is crucial for the regulation of what are called night and day cycles. So that people like you and me, who tend to be awake during the day and sleep at night, we have a specific secretion of melatonin from the pineal. But now to experiment on this, if this is true, then we should be able to do a study in people who work at night and who sleep in the daytime. And there is a very interesting paper that came out for a different reason about 25 years ago. Because cortisol, the stress hormone, works the same way. It is high in the morning and low in the evening in people like you and me who sleep at night and awake during the day. They studied it in prostitutes. Prostitutes work at night and they sleep in the daytime. And their cycle is changed. Their high cortisol comes in the evening, whereas our high cortisol comes in the morning. The cortisol prepares us for the stress of our waking life. And the pineal gland may very much be working the same way. We haven't had a study that we're able to do that with. However, we do know that sleeping medications using analogs of melatonin seem to work fairly well. We do seem to know that jet lag can be reduced by taking melatonin. There was one big study that, sorry, go ahead.
No,
I
is this
don't know
melatonin?
time I
How does
know.
one take with melatonin tablets or what? Or
Well, as I said, half-life is 6 minutes. So you'd have to swallow a lot of tablets. And it's a very expensive compound to make. And that's why we don't have any more. I don't have any more than that to be able to give you. But the pineal gland is getting a lot of attention now. And hopefully, the next time you invite me on your program, I may be able to tell you more about the pineal gland.
yeah, it has really been a very candid and very academic and educational session for us. I hope that we'll have to call you again for another session. I'm sure all
Yeah,
the
we
women.
would love to interact with you.
So I'll get a report from the women and see how they feel about it. So maybe in some future we'll request you and invite you again on our show.
I would be delighted.
So much. Thank you really from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much.
And I hope to see you soon in Bombay, hopefully if you're there.
Yes.
Or maybe in Switzerland from where do you live
Well,
incidentally in Switzerland? Which
Yes.
part of
I
Switzerland
live
do you?
in the mountains of Switzerland, which many people have visited as a tourist resort called Grindelwald.
Which one?
Grindelwald, where you go up to the
Oh,
Jungfrau.
I see. So I'm sure many of us would like to visit you there.
Wonderful. I'd be happy to welcome.
Guidance from you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
My pleasure to all of you.
Bhavika and Kritika, shall we end today's
Yeah.
show with a prayer?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Are you ready to say the prayer with me?
Yeah.
Ajayji, we normally end with a prayer to God, as Kritika said, that we owe everything to Him, and He's the greatest gland operator that we know. So I will say, Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu, which means auspicious unto all. Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu, which means perfect peace to all. Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, fullness unto all. And Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu, prosperity to all. And with this, we shall end our show.
Namaste.
Thank you very much, Kritika, Bhavika, and Dr. Ajayji. We hope to see you again soon. We'll be in touch on the phone. God bless. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you.
End the show. Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om, Hari Om.